The lunch rush at Miller's Diner was in full swing, the small, vintage-style restaurant alive with the clatter of dishes, the murmur of customers, and the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Tiffany Carter wiped her forehead, the heat from the kitchen making the already busy shift even more exhausting. She had been on her feet since dawn, moving from table to table with a tired but polite smile. As one of the few black waitresses in the predominantly white neighborhood of Akron, she had learned to perfect that smile, even when customers barely acknowledged her presence. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Her coworkers gossiped as she hurried past the counter, but she paid no mind. She was focused on her job, on ensuring her section was running smoothly. It was just another day, until the door swung open and the entire energy of the diner shifted. A hushed silence spread through the restaurant, conversations halting as heads turned. A towering figure ducked slightly under the doorway, stepping inside with a casual confidence that made the whole room seem smaller. He wore a simple hoodie and jeans, his face partially concealed by a baseball cap. But there was no mistaking him. LeBron James. Tiffany's breath caught in her throat. The LeBron James, the hometown hero, the NBA legend, and he was standing in her section. For a moment she could only stare, her heart pounding. She wasn't one to get starstruck easily. Famous people ate in restaurants just like everyone else, but this was different. LeBron wasn't just a celebrity. He was an icon, someone who had defied the odds, risen from the same city she called home, and achieved greatness despite every obstacle. She pulled herself together, gripping the notepad in her hand as she approached his table. He smiled at her, an easy, warm smile that somehow put her at ease. "Welcome to Miller's. What can I get for you?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. LeBron glanced at the menu briefly before setting it down. "What do you recommend?" She hesitated before answering. "The bacon cheeseburger is one of our best, and the sweet potato fries are fresh today." "Sounds perfect. I'll take that," he said. As she scribbled down his order, she could feel the eyes of everyone in the diner watching her. Some of her coworkers whispered to one another, envious of her luck. But Tiffany didn't let it shake her. She gave him a quick nod before hurrying back to put in his order. As she worked, she couldn't help but think about how surreal the moment was. She had served hundreds of customers over the years, some kind, some rude, some who barely acknowledged her presence. But this moment felt different. LeBron had looked at her, really looked at her, like she was a person, not just someone carrying a tray. When she returned with his food, he thanked her with another smile, then dug into his meal. She continued working, sneaking glances at him when she could. He seemed relaxed, unbothered by the attention even though half the diner was still watching him. As he finished his meal, Tiffany brought over the check. LeBron took it with a nod, reaching into his pocket to pull out his wallet. He scribbled something on the receipt before folding it up and handing it to her with a firm handshake. "Thank you for the great service," he said. Tiffany smiled, tucking the receipt into her apron before heading to the back. She didn't expect much. A decent tip, maybe a polite note. But when she unfolded the receipt, her breath hitched. Her eyes scanned the handwritten words, and before she could stop herself, tears welled up. The note read, "Tiffany, I see you. I know the hard work you put in. I know what it's like to grind and feel invisible. But you are not invisible. You are important. Keep pushing. Your story is not finished yet. Much love, LeBron." She blinked rapidly, a single tear slipping down her cheek. But it wasn't just the words that left her breathless. It was what lay underneath them. A tip for $10,000. Her hands trembled as she stared at the number. She had seen customers tip generously before, but nothing like this. Nothing that could change a life. Her coworkers gasped as they peeked over her shoulder. "Is that real?" one of them whispered. Tiffany covered her mouth, overwhelmed by emotion. It was real. It was very real. She rushed back out, her heart hammering. "Mr. James," she started, her voice cracking. He turned, standing near the door, his massive frame seeming even taller in the small space. His eyes met hers, full of quiet understanding. I don't know how to thank you," she stammered. He smiled. "You don't have to. Just keep going. Keep believing in yourself." And with that, he was gone. leaving Tiffany standing in the middle of the diner, the receipt clutched in her shaking hands. She would never forget that moment, not just because of the money, but because of what he had given her. Acknowledgement. A reminder that her hard work mattered, that she mattered. That day, Tiffany walked out of Miller's Diner feeling seen for the first time in a long time. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream again. Tiffany's hands still trembled as she stared down at the check. The numbers swam before her eyes, her vision blurred by the tears she had tried so hard to hold back. It was surreal, almost too good to be true. Never in her life had she held this much money at once. Never had anyone recognized her struggles in such a profound way. She had served countless customers over the years, most of whom barely spared her a glance. But LeBron James, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, had not only noticed her, but had acknowledged her worth. The weight of his words settled in her chest like a warm embrace. "You are not invisible. Keep pushing. Your story is not finished yet." Those words echoed in her mind, reverberating in the deepest corners of her heart where self-doubt had festered for so long. She felt a gentle touch on her arm. It was Lisa, one of her co-workers, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Tiff, this is crazy. You have to do something with this." Tiffany let out a shaky breath. "I know. I don't even know where to start." Her manager, Mr. Dawson, approached with a knowing smile. He was an older man with kind eyes, the kind of boss who worked just as hard as his employees. "You deserve this, kid," he said, nodding at the check in her hands. "I've seen how hard you work, seen you pull double shifts, seen you come in sick just so you could make ends meet. If anyone deserves a break, it's you." Tiffany swallowed the lump in her throat. I never expected something like this, not in a million years." Lisa nudged her playfully. "Well, it happened, so what are you going to do with it?" The question was both thrilling and terrifying. What was she going to do with it? The answer didn't come immediately. That night, she went home to her small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Akron, still in shock. The place was modest, barely furnished, with second-hand items she had scraped together over the years. Her mother had always told her, "Make do with what you have, baby," and she had. But now, for the first time in her life, she had the opportunity to do more than just make do. She sat on her bed staring at the check in her hands. $10,000. It wasn't millions. But to her, it was everything. She thought about all the bills she could finally pay off, the stress she could lift off her shoulders. She thought about her little sister Monique, who had just started college and was already drowning in student loans. She thought about her mother, who had worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table when they were growing up. And then, she thought about herself. Tiffany had always dreamed of going back to school. She had started college years ago, studying to become a nurse, but life had other plans. After her father passed away unexpectedly, she had dropped out to help her mother keep the family afloat. 1 year turned into 2, 2 into 5, and eventually, the dream of finishing her degree had faded into the background. But now it didn't have to. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It had been years since she had even considered looking at tuition costs, but tonight something inside her urged her forward. She typed in the name of the community college she had once attended. She clicked on the financial aid page. She held her breath. The tuition for 1 semester was a little over $3,000. Tiffany's heart pounded. For the time in years, she could afford to enroll in classes without worrying about how she was going to pay rent. A rush of emotion flooded her chest. She closed her eyes, gripping the check tightly. LeBron had said her story wasn't finished yet. Maybe it was time to start writing the next chapter. The following week, Tiffany walked into the admissions office of Akron Community College. The last time she had been here, she had been 21 years old, struggling to balance a part-time job while taking night classes. Now, at 26, she was back. This time, with hope instead of desperation. She met with an advisor, a kind woman named Mrs. Alvarez, who walked her through the re-enrollment process. "So, Miss Carter," she said, glancing at her file, "you were studying nursing before you left?" Tiffany nodded. "Yes, but I had to drop out. Family circumstances." Mrs. Alvarez gave her a warm smile. "Well, it's never too late to come back. And from what I see here, most of your previous credits are still valid. If you start this semester, you could finish in a little over a year. A year. The thought sent a thrill through Tiffany's veins. A year from now, she could be walking across a stage, holding a diploma instead of a tray of food. She filled out the necessary paperwork, paid her tuition for the semester, and left the office with a course schedule in hand. She had done it. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward. Tiffany continued working at Miller's Diner while attending classes, balancing work and school the way she always had, with resilience and determination. But something had changed. She no longer felt invisible. People started recognizing her. A local news station had picked up the story about LeBron's generous tip, and soon customers came in asking, "Aren't you the waitress from the LeBron story?" She felt awkward about the attention, but then she realized something. Her story had inspired others. One afternoon, a young girl named Jasmine, no older than 17, came into the diner with her mother. "I just wanted to meet you," Jasmine said, her voice shy but earnest. "I saw your story and it made me want to keep going. I was thinking about dropping out of school, but you made me realize I don't have to give up." Tiffany's heart clenched. She reached across the table, giving the girl's hand a gentle squeeze. "You don't," she said firmly. "You never have to give up." That moment solidified something deep inside her. She wanted to do more than just finish her own journey. She wanted to help others do the same. A year later, Tiffany stood on stage in her graduation cap and gown, tears in her eyes as she accepted her diploma. She had done it. As she walked across the stage, she spotted a familiar figure in the crowd. LeBron James. Her breath hitched. He was there. As soon as the ceremony ended, she made her way through the crowd, her heart pounding. He greeted her with that same warm smile he had given her in the diner. "I told you your story wasn't finished yet," he said. Tiffany swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. "You changed my life," she whispered. He shook his head. "Nah, you changed your own life. I just gave you a little push." She smiled, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Well, that little push meant everything." They took a picture together, one that she would treasure forever, a reminder of how far she had come, and how much further she still had to go. Because LeBron was right. Her story wasn't finished yet. It was just beginning. Graduating was just the beginning. As Tiffany held her diploma in her hands, a whirlwind of emotions filled her heart. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living, but even as she celebrated, an uneasiness crept into her thoughts. What now? The money LeBron had given her had been life-changing, but it wasn't infinite. She still had to work at Miller's Diner to support herself, and although she had a degree in nursing, finding the right job wasn't going to be easy. She sat in her small apartment that night, staring at the walls she had come to know so well. There was something inside her, a feeling she couldn't shake, a feeling that told her she was meant for something more than just finding a steady job and paying bills. She thought back to that young girl Jasmine, who had come to the diner. The way her eyes had lit up when she said she wanted to keep going because of Tiffany's story. What if that was her purpose? What if she could help others find their way, just like she had? The next few weeks were a blur of job interviews, hospital visits, and long shifts at the diner. Tiffany had landed a part-time job at a local clinic, assisting with patient care. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't easy, but she was grateful for the opportunity. Still, that feeling in her gut wouldn't go away. She started spending her free time volunteering at community centers, talking to young students, single mothers, and struggling workers who reminded her of herself. She shared her story whenever she could, hoping it would inspire just one person to keep going. One evening, she sat down at her small kitchen table and started writing. It was just thoughts. Memories of the struggles she had faced, the sacrifices she had made. But the more she wrote, the clearer her vision became. She wanted to start something, a program, a foundation, something that would help people like her, people who had been told their dreams weren't worth chasing. She reached out to a few local organizations, pitching her idea, a mentorship program for young women of color who needed guidance, support, and most of all, hope. The response was overwhelming. Within a month, she had a team of volunteers. Within 3 months, they had secured a small space in the community center. And within 6 months, the Carter Women's Initiative was born. Running the initiative while working at the clinic and the diner was exhausting, but Tiffany had never felt more alive. She spent her mornings at the clinic, her afternoons at the diner, and her evenings mentoring young women who had nowhere else to turn. The stories she heard were heartbreaking. There was Keisha, a 17-year-old high school dropout who had been kicked out of her home. There was Maria, a single mother trying to go back to school while raising two kids. There was Simone, a brilliant young woman who had never been told she was capable of more than just working a minimum wage job. Tiffany saw herself in each of them, and she fought for them. She helped them apply for financial aid, connected them with job training programs, and most importantly, reminded them that their worth wasn't determined by their struggles. Word spread quickly. Local newspapers covered the initiative, and soon small businesses and donors started reaching out wanting to help. And then, one day, her phone rang. "Hello, Tiffany Carter?" a deep voice asked. Her breath caught. It was LeBron James. She nearly dropped the phone. "LeBron," she whispered, hardly believing it. He chuckled. "Yeah, it's me. I've been hearing a lot about what you're doing back in Akron. I had to reach out." Tiffany was speechless. "I just want to say I'm proud of you," he continued. "What you're doing is bigger than anything money can buy. You're changing lives." Tears welled in her eyes. I don't even know what to say." "How about we meet up?" he suggested. "I want to help." A week later, Tiffany found herself sitting across from LeBron in a private meeting room at a local community center. He listened intently as she explained everything: the struggles, the victories, the lives that were being changed. And when she finished, he smiled. "I want to be a part of this," he said. "I want to help you take this to the next level." Tiffany felt like she was dreaming. With LeBron's support, the Carter Women's Initiative expanded beyond what she had ever imagined. They secured more funding, opened more mentorship programs, and even partnered with local colleges to create scholarship opportunities for young women who wanted to go back to school. The diner waitress who had once struggled just to get by was now a leader, a mentor, a change maker. Years passed, and the initiative continued to grow. Tiffany no longer worked at the diner. She had dedicated herself fully to the organization, ensuring that no woman in Akron ever felt as lost as she once had. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, sharing her story, and reminding people that one moment of kindness could change a life. She met countless young women who told her that her story had inspired them to keep going, and every time she heard those words, she thought back to that note. "You are not invisible. Keep pushing. Your story is not finished yet." Tiffany had once believed her story was over before it had even begun, but now she knew the truth. Her story would live on in every life she touched, in every woman who dared to dream because she had once dared to believe. And all of it, every moment, every struggle, every victory, had started with one simple act of kindness: a tip, a note, a belief in something greater, and a waitress who refused to be invisible. Tiffany often found herself reflecting on the moment that had changed everything. One moment in time, a simple act of generosity, had rippled outward, touching not just her own life but the lives of countless others. It was something she had learned through her journey. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with something small. LeBron's note, his words, his belief in her. It had given her the push she needed. But in the end, she had done the work. She had taken that moment and used it as fuel to build something greater than herself. She often wondered, how many people were out there waiting for that moment? How many people had potential locked inside them, just waiting for someone to recognize it? It was that question that kept her going. The Carter Women's Initiative was now more than just a local program. It was expanding into new cities, partnering with businesses and universities to provide resources for women who needed them most. The initiative had started as a small mentorship program, but now it was offering scholarships, childcare assistance for working mothers, and financial literacy workshops. Tiffany had even begun writing a book, part memoir, part guide, to help others who felt lost, just as she once had. Her inbox was constantly filled with messages from women across the country, thanking her for sharing her story. "I was ready to give up, but your journey gave me hope. Because of you, I went back to school. Your story reminded me that I am worth more than the struggles I've faced." Each message reinforced what she had come to believe. Sometimes, people just needed to be seen. One afternoon, Tiffany received a message from a high school teacher in Chicago. Hi, Tiffany. I teach a class of senior girls from underserved communities, and we've been following your story. Would you be willing to speak to them? Without hesitation, she agreed. A week later, she found herself in front of a classroom full of young women, all of them staring at her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. She took a deep breath, remembering how, not long ago, she had been just like them, unsure of her future, unsure of her worth. I was once sitting exactly where you are, she began, her voice steady. I was working long hours, feeling stuck, feeling like my dreams weren't meant for me. But then something happened. Someone saw me. Someone reminded me that my story wasn't finished. She told them about the diner, about LeBron's note, about the decision to believe in herself again. She told them about the hard work, the sacrifices, the moments of doubt. But the most important thing I learned, she said, looking around the room, it's that you don't have to wait for someone else to see you. You have to see yourself first. After the talk, a young girl named Aaliyah approached her, eyes shining. I didn't think I could go to college, Aaliyah admitted, voice shaking. But I think I want to try, Tiffany smiled. You should, and when you do, reach out to me. We'll find a way to make it happen. That moment cemented something in her heart. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Months passed, and Tiffany's influence continued to grow. She was invited to speak at larger events, to share her insights on resilience and perseverance. She had been featured in national publications, recognized for her work in empowering women. And then, one evening, she received an email that left her speechless. It was from the ESPI Awards. She had been nominated for the Arthur Ashe Courage Award. Her hands shook as she read the words over and over. She thought back to the countless nights she had spent exhausted, wondering if she would ever get ahead, to the years she had felt invisible, to the moment she had held that check from LeBron, realizing that her life was about to change. She never expected recognition. She never expected awards. But here she was. The night of the ceremony, she walked the red carpet in a simple yet elegant black gown. It felt surreal, being in the presence of some of the greatest athletes and changemakers in the world. But more than that, she felt proud. When her name was announced, she took the stage, her heart pounding. She looked out at the audience, her voice strong and clear as she spoke. This award isn't just for me. It's for every woman who has ever felt like she wasn't enough. For every person who has ever been told their dreams were too big. For every waitress, single mother, struggling student, this is proof that your story is not over. She paused, scanning the room until she found the one person who had set everything in motion. LeBron. He nodded at her, his expression full of pride. She smiled. And to the man who reminded me of that when I needed it most, thank you. Tiffany never forgot where she came from. She continued working tirelessly, ensuring that no woman in need was left behind. Years later, she opened the Carter Center for Women's Empowerment, a fully funded nonprofit that provided mentorship, education, and financial assistance to women across the country. And every year, on the anniversary of the day LeBron had left her that note, she visited Miller's Diner. She would sit in the same booth where he had sat, order the same meal he had ordered, and leave a note for the waitress serving her. I see you. I know the hard work you put in. You are not invisible. Keep pushing. Your story is not finished yet. She always left a generous tip, because she knew better than anyone. Sometimes one moment of kindness could change a life forever. Years passed, and Tiffany's name became synonymous with resilience, empowerment, and second chances. What had begun as a personal struggle transformed into a national movement. She had never sought fame, but her story resonated with people in ways she never imagined. Her nonprofit, the Carter Center for Women's Empowerment, expanded across the country. More than just a mentorship program, it became a full-fledged support system for women who needed help breaking cycles of poverty, lack of education, and limited opportunities. Corporations partnered with her, donating to scholarships, creating internships, and funding business grants for women looking to start their own ventures. Universities collaborated with the organization to provide tuition assistance to single mothers and young women from underserved communities, and through it all, Tiffany never forgot her roots. She made it a point to visit every branch of the initiative, meeting with the women personally. She listened to their stories, their fears, and their dreams. She reminded them, as she had once been reminded, that their stories were still being written. One day, while speaking at a center in Detroit, she met a woman named Rachel. Rachel was in her 40s, a mother of three, and had spent most of her life working low-paying jobs just to keep her family afloat. She had always dreamed of becoming a teacher, but had convinced herself that it was too late. Tiffany sat with her, holding her hands. "It's never too late," she said. "You have spent your whole life taking care of others. Now it's time to believe in yourself." With the help of the initiative, Rachel enrolled in college. 2 years later, she graduated with a degree in education and became a teacher at the same school her children attended. Stories like Rachel's reminded Tiffany of why she kept going. One afternoon, while Tiffany was in her office, her assistant knocked on the door. "There's a call for you," she said, barely able to contain her excitement. "It's the White House." Tiffany blinked. "The what?" Her assistant grinned. "The White House. The First Lady wants to meet with you." Tiffany's heart raced. She had been honored many times over the years, but this was something entirely different. A week later, she found herself sitting across from the First Lady in the Oval Office. The moment felt surreal, but Tiffany had long since learned how to handle herself in rooms of power. "You inspire so many women," the First Lady said, "and we'd like to work with you on a national initiative to support education and workforce development for women." Tiffany felt a lump in her throat. She thought about all the women she had met over the years. The young girls who had been told they weren't good enough. The mothers who had sacrificed their dreams, the waitresses, the students, the workers who had once felt invisible. Now they were being seen. "I would be honored," she said, her voice steady. No matter how far Tiffany's influence spread, she always made time to return home to Akron. She worked with local schools to ensure that young girls had access to mentorship and resources. She partnered with businesses to create job opportunities for women looking to re-enter the workforce, and she never stopped visiting Miller's Diner. One evening, as she sat in her usual booth, a young waitress approached with wide eyes. "You're Tiffany Carter," the girl stammered. Tiffany smiled. "That's me." The waitress looked down at the note Tiffany had left on the table, her hands trembling. I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I've been struggling so much trying to figure out my next step, and then I read this." Tiffany reached for her hand. "I was you once, and if someone hadn't believed in me, I wouldn't be here today. So now it's my turn to believe in you." Tears welled in the girl's eyes. Tiffany slipped a small envelope into her hands. Inside was a scholarship application fully funded by her initiative. "Go chase your dreams," she said softly. The girl clutched the envelope to her chest, her expression one of pure gratitude. Tiffany walked out of the diner that night with a full heart. She had come full circle. Years later, Tiffany stood at the grand opening of the Carter Women's Academy, a state-of-the-art school dedicated to providing education, leadership training, and career development for women of all ages. As she cut the ribbon, she looked out at the crowd, women from all walks of life standing together, celebrating not just her success, but their own. She had once thought her story was written for her, that her path had been decided by the circumstances of her birth, by the struggles she had faced. But now she knew the truth. She had rewritten her story, and in doing so, she had helped thousands of others rewrite theirs. As she stood before the crowd, she thought back to the moment it had all begun. A note, a tip, a reminder that she was seen. And now she was making sure the whole world saw the women who had once felt invisible. Her story was no longer just hers. It was the story of every woman who had ever dared to dream. And it was only just beginning. Years later, Tiffany sat in her office watching the sunset over the city skyline. The Carter Women's Academy had expanded to multiple states, and her nonprofit had impacted the lives of thousands. Yet despite all the accolades and success, she remained deeply connected to the mission that started it all, lifting others the way she had once been lifted. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Aaliyah, the young girl she had met years ago in Chicago. "I got accepted into medical school. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. Thank you for believing in me." Tiffany smiled, pride swelling in her chest. This was the true reward. Seeing others rise, seeing lives change, knowing that her struggles had paved the way for something greater. She stepped outside, breathing in the evening air, reflecting on how a single note in a diner had set all of this in motion. One act of kindness had turned into a lifetime of impact. and as long as she had the power to lift others, she would never stop. Her story had begun with a message of hope. Now she spent her life passing that message on. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a black waitress serving LeBron James and receiving a note? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.